Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talk Nerdy. Today is Monday, May 15th, 2023, and I'm the host of the show, Cara Santa Maria. And as always, before we dive into this week's episode, I do want to thank those of you who make Talk Nerdy possible. Remember, Talk Nerdy is and will always be 100% free to download, and I mostly rely on the support of individuals just like you to make that happen. This week's top patrons include Daniel Lang, David J.E. Smith, Mary Neva, Brian Holden, David Compton, Gabrielle F. Jaramillo, Joe Wilkinson, Pasquale Gelati, and Ulrika Hagman. I just want to thank all of you so much from the bottom of my heart for making this show possible week after week. So, who have we got on deck for you this week? It's a really good one. I actually really enjoyed this conversation. It was funny. It was smart. I learned an awful lot. So I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Katie Spalding. Now, Katie is a mathematician. And I just kind of want to read you her bio because I don't think I could write anything better than this. Dr. Katie Spalding spent 10 years studying math, which is about the upper limit on how much math you can do before people start actively avoiding you at parties. She received her PhD in 2018, worked at IFL Science, and has supplied research for the TV show, I think it's QI. I don't even know. I'm so sorry, Katie. And its sister podcast, No Such Thing as a Fish. Her articles have also appeared in HuffPost and Politics Means Politics, among others. She has a new book. It's her first book, and it's brilliant. It's called Edison's Ghosts, The Untold Weirdness of History's Greatest Geniuses. So without any further ado, here she is, Dr. Katie Spalding. Well, Katie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I'm excited to talk about your book, Edison's Ghosts, The Untold Weirdness of History's Greatest Geniuses. And I have to just right off the bat quote the press coverage. So I don't know if people know, but when books first come out, galleys are often sent to reviewers, and there's, info. There's like a fact sheet about the book. And one of the things that I love on this one sheet is, here we go. Edison's Ghosts is filled with examples of the so-called best of humanity doing, to put it bluntly, some really dumb shit. You'll discover stories that deserve to be told but never are, the hilarious, regrettable, and downright bafflingly lesser-known achievements that never made it into our history books until now. So I am so excited to hear about smart people doing dumb shit.
Yeah.
And I think before we even get any of those examples, I'd love to know what inspired you to write this book?
So I was asked this literally the other day, actually, and there is a really specific jumping off point where I was doing my PhD, and I took out, spur of the moment, this one book on astrophysics, which, by the way, has nothing to do with what I was studying. I was just in the library and I was like, this looks really interesting. And there was this one footnote where it was talking about the brightness of the sun or something. And this one footnote just goes, of course, as much as we're told not to stare at the sun, Moorfields Eye Hospital has never had a case where someone has gone permanently blind from staring at the sun. And of course, as Isaac Newton proved when he stared directly at the sun in 1665, it usually only lasts a few days of injury and blindness. And I was like, excuse me, what was this? So I started, I just Googled it, what was Isaac Newton up to? And so, yeah, when the pandemic started and everyone was like, Isaac Newton discovered gravity when he was under quarantine. Imagine what you can do. It's like, yeah, he did. But he also, it turns out, spent so much time trying to just blind himself. He'd stuck a bodkin. So it's I guess the closest thing we have today is a knitting needle. He would stick them in his eyes. He would stick brass plates and his own fingers in his eyes. He set up an experiment to stare at the sun for as long as he could, and it sent him blind for 3 days. And he was just like doing this out of like curiosity to see like how his eyes worked and how light worked and stuff. And it literally, like, it just became one of those things that, you know, I say, do you know, this might be a me thing, it might be a generation thing, I don't know. But when you just have like a fact that's in your brain and it will never ever leave, and you just like, you're driven to like shoehorn it into every conversation. Like someone will be talking about like their daughter's first birthday, and you just go, yeah, interesting. But did you know that Isaac Newton once stared at the sun for so long that he went blind for 3 days? So I think I was just, I just recently finished a temporary job, and it was the first job that I had after graduating. And I was bored, basically. And I had this idea that I was like, maybe I should like try and write, I don't know, like, maybe I should try and pitch like a column to some internet place of like silly things from history that smart people did. I could definitely get Isaac Newton in there. One of the ones that always got me was Pythagoras, because like obviously coming from a maths background, one of the first things that we do is prove that root 2 is irrational. And the story that always goes along with that is the first guy who proved that root 2 is irrational got murdered for it. Because
what?
Yeah, so he was, so you know Pythagoras, right?
Oh yeah.
So he was like a cult leader. We would definitely call him a cult leader today. And one of the things that he taught was there are no such things as irrational numbers. So like he couldn't conceive of a number like the square root of 2 or pi or whatever. He would say like, no, it might be that we haven't figured out how to express it as an exact fraction yet, but you can express it as a fraction. And it was one of his followers that was the first person to ever prove like, no, you can't. It's impossible. Like there are these numbers that just cannot be written as a fraction. And it was like considered such blasphemy in this cult that all of the other followers, they drowned him at sea for blasphemy.
Wow, that's like the nerdiest, but most wicked thing I've ever heard.
Yeah, like they took maths really seriously back.
Seriously.
So like that was definitely one where I was like, that could be a short little story. And like before I knew it, I was like, you know what? All of these people from history, like they were all mental, really.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I managed, like I was just like going through all of the random little facts that I knew, and I got to like 15 or something, and I was talking to one of my friends about it, and he works for IFLS as well at the time, still does, and he was like, you know, I've got a bunch of these stories too. You should like get in touch with like a literary agent, and you should like write these down in a book. And I was like, you know what, James, you're right. That's basically where the book came from.
I love that so much. You mentioned a few things in that story that I feel like bear repeating and digging a little bit deeper. So obviously you mentioned that you studied mathematics. You're a mathematician, yes? Like you got a PhD in mathematics.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
Okay, that's like a thing that I know exists in the world. Like, you know, people know this like theoretically that people are mathematicians and there are actually people with PhDs in mathematics. But I think it's quite rare for people to say, I know a mathematician, or I have met somebody who spent that long studying mathematics. And like, what does that even look like? Because for most people, math was a few classes in school.
Yeah, well, I kind of stumbled into it, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess like probably a lot of your listeners are American. They probably don't know how it works in the UK, but basically we start like shaving off opportunities for what you want to study really early. So by the time I was like 16, by the time any student is 16 in the UK, you basically have like 3 or 4, maybe 5 subjects that you're studying, and that's it. And so at that point, I really, really wanted to be a linguist. My high school only offered German as a foreign language, but I was like, my goal was to study like German and Russian or something at university. But I was like, I didn't want to study German alone for A level. So I talked my best friend into doing German with me. And she said, like, as a trade off, I had to do further maths with her. So that's like, so that meant I had to do, out of the 4 classes that I was doing, 2 of them had to be maths. So I had to do maths and further maths. So you have like AP courses, right? That's sort of the equivalent.
Yeah, we've got different kind of like, there's AP and there's IB and there's, like upper kind of level courses.
Yeah. You do further maths if you're like really intending on studying maths at uni. And basically, by the end of 6th form, which is 2 years long, I was applying for uni. And at that point, I was applying for philosophy degrees. So I had switched sort of from languages to philosophy. I got into uni and studied philosophy for like 2 months, and then I dropped out. And I was like, it's just not for me. The only course that I had enjoyed, like really, really enjoyed, was like logic.
Right. The math of philosophy.
Exactly, right? So I happened to like meet my further maths teacher after I went back home. And she was like, yeah, I knew it was a mistake. I don't know why you didn't apply to study maths. And I was like, well, you should have told me this before I went off and spent, 2 months worth of tuition or whatever. But okay, so I reapplied again to a different uni to study maths. And yeah, it turns out maths is really great for the most part. I not only do I really like maths, but I really like the bits of maths that everyone else seems to hate. Like,
interesting.
Yeah, like a lot of times I think if you ask someone who does like maths, especially in school, if you ask someone, why do you like maths? A lot of the time you'll hear like, oh, it helps us figure out the world. It helps us, you can throw a ball and maths can help you figure out where it's going to land. And it helps you figure out weather patterns and how waves work and all of this sort of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it does do all that. And that's very cool. But for me, it's boring as hell. Chaos theory, for instance, one of the biggest letdowns there is to study. Like, you watch The Butterfly Effect or Run Lola Run or whatever, and you think, oh, chaos theory must be amazing. It must be so interesting. And it's like, no, there's one fun-looking graph called the Lorentz butterfly, and the rest of it is basically plug in some numbers into a computer and let it run. It's boring. I like the maths where it's like, so imagine that all cows are just spheres. Or like,
okay, yeah.
Or like, a coffee cup and a donut are the same shape. When you get right down to it. So I also happened to luck out that my final year project happened to be really interesting to me. It was about it's about the Markov equation, which is, so it's called a Diophantine equation, but basically what that just means is like, again, we can like compare it to Pythagoras, where it's like x squared plus y squared equals z squared, and the way to like quote unquote solve it is to find the numbers that fit. So that's that's a Diophantine equation. So the Markov equation is slightly different. But basically my project was to like figure out patterns in the numbers that solve this equation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't sound very interesting, but it is.
Well, it kind of sounds like code breaking and cryptography and like cool, like, I don't know, like there's just something kind of fun about like pattern seeking.
Exactly, yeah. So it is like related to, like, there's a quite a few aspects of number theory in there, which is like the basis of cryptography and stuff. And yeah, but what I loved as well, which is definitely my brand, is that it's not just number theory, it's also like dynamical systems. There's also like hyperbolic geometry in there. There's like, yeah, all kinds of stuff. And like a lot of what I ended up studying is stuff that probably a lot of working mathematicians don't even necessarily consider like real maths. Like one of my main results from my PhD, like, I ended up generalizing this result that goes back to Galois. And it had never been generalized before, but I think it's just because no one really cared. But yeah, I mean, I just found it super interesting. And that's basically my story. Yeah, at every juncture of my sort of CV so far, it has been, why did you make this decision then, Katie? And the answer is, well, it felt like a good idea at the time. And so that's what I did.
So then, of course, that leads me to my next, probably more difficult question, because I think you're probably still in the process. This is not a question that you can answer with a hindsight bias.
Okay.
But like, you get your PhD in mathematics not that long ago now. What is it, like 5 years ago?
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And so what do you do with a PhD in mathematics?
Well, so most people that I know of either did a postdoc or became like like government agents or whatever. That's definitely, if anyone is like wondering, oh, I would love to study maths, but I just need this tiny thing to like push me over the edge. Let me tell you now, you meet a lot of ex-spies.
Oh, interesting. So weird.
Well, especially from like the Cold War and even before that, like people just loved cryptography and stuff. So you get a lot of people who are like, what was I doing 30 years ago? It doesn't matter. And there's a lot of people who go into like industry. I think once you finish like a maths degree and you just get like your bachelor's or your master's or whatever, a lot of those people go into teaching and banking, and like computing and stuff. I think when you get to the people who have then spent another 3 or 4 years on top of that, they tend to be like the purists who are like, actually, I just want to look at numbers for the rest of my life. And yeah, the trouble is getting a postdoc is really difficult. And also, like, I had been studying maths by that point for like literally a decade, and I was just, I wanted a change,
Of course. And so how many mathematicians write popular science books about the history of science?
Oh, I don't know, maybe like a dozen.
You're like 3, I don't know. No, but that's really cool. I mean, I love the topic. I love that you can still come at it with the expertise that comes from just like having been in academia for so long, from reading academic papers, from sort of, there's something that there's just kind of like a wisdom or a comfort, even just comfort, that comes along with sort of like a being in academia that probably gave you a perspective that that facilitated this work. Yet at the same time, this work is like very punk rock, right? It's very like, we're going to take the narrative, the sort of Western narrative that we're all used to, and we're going to turn it on its ear.
Well, for sure, being around a whole bunch of academics does make you not really buy into the whole like untouchable genius sort of myth. Like,
right.
I met a lot of very intelligent people hanging around a lot of very like awe-inspiring establishments, and I've got drunk with a lot of them as well. And like the stuff that they come out with and you see them do, it's just, you can't imagine that. Like, after you've seen that, you can't imagine like Albert Einstein was this guy who like never slipped up and never did anything really stupid just for the hell of it. But I mean, I also would say that, I was able to read a lot of dry academic texts that I probably wouldn't otherwise have been able to. I'm glad that trained me.
I'm curious, big picture, sort of the forest, not so much the trees. When you sat down to draft this, when you edited it, when you talked about the marketing around it, all of the things that go in to putting together a story with a point of view, whether it is fiction or nonfiction, I believe, there is a point of view within this writing. And I'm curious how much of that point of view was intentionally sort of commentary on patriarchal, like sort of the white man genius standard, was how much of it was a feminist sort of anti-racist intentionality, and how much of this was more an attempt, and I'm not saying that these things are different, but more of an attempt to just like humanize these people. Like, ultimately, what were you hoping to accomplish? And did that change as you were, from the time that you sat down to start to the time that you finished?
Oh yeah, it absolutely changed. When I started writing it, all I wanted to do was like make just like a funny book, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
And weirdly, one of the first things that changed was, it's kind of paradoxical. Like, I think I wasn't going like snarky enough. So the jokes that were in there originally, I was getting notes back like, well, this just isn't accurate. And I was like, yeah, I know it's not accurate. It's a joke.
And they're like, oh, jokes are best when we have to explain them, aren't they?
Yeah. I think that's the rule of jokes, isn't it? So one of the first things that changed was I had to get snarkier. I was like, I don't want to take the jokes out, so I have to go the other direction. I'm going to get snarkier. And luckily that's like a core aspect of my personality, so it wasn't hard. But after, like, once you're already being snarky about like Isaac Newton, I think it just kind of goes without saying that like you are bringing down like these this like pantheon of geniuses. You're bringing them down a peg, and I think it was when I was sort of, it was because obviously, like, yeah, I am a feminist, and I have been like, in STEM, surrounded by dudes like my whole career, if you like. I used to, like, during my PhD, just out of curiosity, like, not like I wasn't campaigning or anything, but I did used to, when I would be in a conference or a lecture, I'd like count up the men versus women ratio, and it usually came out about 1 to 10.
Wow.
Women to men.
And that's like better than I expected for math.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in maths, I think the general statistics is it's like 50-50 until the end of bachelor's, and then it just drops off. It's like I say, like 1 to 10. professionals. And it's, I mean, that's because of loads of reasons. I think there's this sort of thing where I think if you're a guy, you're often taught like you can do it, and if you're not, you're often taught like, well, you did it, and that means like, you know, anyone can do it. I mean,
right.
whether that's like overt or something that's like very implicit, like, you know, implied when you're sort of growing up. I think a lot of, you know, women and girls and others are like, they sort of grow up with this idea that like, I could do it, so it was easy. And so when you get to that point where it's like, okay, after this, it's not going to be easy, then the natural, like, logical conclusion is, therefore, I'm not going to be able to do it.
Right. Or therefore, I'm not cut out for it. Like this idea that when the boys in the class are called on, and when the boys in the class are like, oh, I got this, this is easy, and that view is reinforced, and a girl in the class is like, I think I can figure it out, but it's
Yeah,
hard.
exactly. Yeah.
Then that's not reinforced as, oh, that's like, oh, well, then maybe this isn't for you, instead of, oh, that's how it is for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And like, there's this thing of, you know, if you're a boy and you get it wrong, then it's like you say, yeah, you got it wrong, but that's okay. You're still learning. Versus like, you got it wrong, that's okay. Girls can't do this kind of thing.
Right, exactly. Like we expected you to get it wrong, so
Yeah.
no harm, no foul. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So where was it? What was I talking about? Yeah, because I realized that I had so many more men in my list than women, and I was like, obviously this is a problem, but like, what can I do about that? Like,
You can't rewrite history.
yeah. Well, it's not even that I would need to rewrite history. There are almost certainly like as many like women geniuses as there were men in the past.
Right, but are they documented?
Yeah, but no one's heard of them
Exactly.
because they spent their lives looking after 16 kids whilst they had scarlet fever. Like,
And while their male counterparts stole their Nobel Prizes.
exactly, right? Yeah. So, I mean, it's actually one of the criticisms that I have got from reviewers, and like, I get it. Like, I get it. If I could have included more women, I would have. But the trouble is, like, yeah, if you're a woman in history in like 1750 or whatever, you're either, and you're smart, like, then you either need to be put in your place or like no one is taking notice of you. And the very few that were taken notice of, like today, we know them as, you know, like Marie Curie, the pioneering female scientist, or who else is in here? Emily du Châtelet, the pioneering female mathematician who was Voltaire's girlfriend, and that's mainly what we know her for, by the way. She was boning Voltaire. And like, it's like, well, that's great and all, but like, it's not who they were, is it? It doesn't take into account like the I mean, Emily du Châtelet, I fell in love with her while I was writing this. She was an amazing mathematician, which, by the way, she only managed to be because like she was rich as fuck and her parents were like super, like, not exactly forward thinking, but like she had a bunch of brothers, so they didn't really need her to be like the perfect little girl. But she is basically remembered as Voltaire's girlfriend, and she shouldn't be, because not only was she like this like amazing mathematical genius in her own right, like there's this amazing story of like her last child that she had was, instead of being like wrapped up in towels and stuff, she was laid out on a book of geometry, which I love.
Wow.
But like, she also wasn't just Voltaire's girlfriend. Like, she had an amazing list of lovers. She married like some some army guy who was like clearly just in it for like the land and titles, as people did back then. It was just how things worked. But like, she also dated like a dashing pirate and like poets and like I just think we need it reversed. Like, she was badass and shouldn't be Voltaire's girlfriend. Like, she was like some live-in concubine. Like, he moved in with her, and yeah, she was great.
To some extent, it's kind of not the point, right? The criticism that, like, why are there so many men in this book? It should be more egalitarian. Well, like, you're kind of taking, I mean, not taking the piss, but like taking down this lone genius stereotype and being like, look, these guys were sometimes morons or sometimes assholes, or sometimes they were doing the best they could with what they had. But like, the whole point of the book is to show that other side of, very often, these men. Yeah. Sometimes women, but a lot of them were men.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Like, that was one of my sort of, I mean, that's like where I started, basically. I've never really thought that genius, as we understand it, is something that really exists. I think a lot of even those people that really did single-handedly do something amazing, and there have been like a few people who just had that spark in their brain and completely upended physics or something. But even they, like, it's because they got lucky one day, like, or they had a weird dream, or they were completely high in an oven one day, looking at you, Descartes. A lot of the benefits of the modern world, like, we don't even think of them. Like, we're actively taught that, like, oh, Edison invented the light bulb. It's like, well, no, he didn't. He was a PR man. Like, 15 other guys got to the light bulb before he did, and all of them were working in collaboration with other people. He didn't lift a finger to do anything. He just was good at PR.
And even when somebody does, like you mentioned, actually come up with like a new and revolutionary idea, it happens in the context of all the things that led up to it. Like, nobody works in a vacuum.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So, like, one of the things that, like, I mean, if you want to hate Einstein, for instance, like, there's pretty good evidence that, like, a lot of his work was proofread or come up with originally by his first wife, who no one's heard of. But like, yeah, I mean, if he didn't have his first wife looking out for him, like, we wouldn't know who he was. He'd be some guy that some people in Berlin or possibly New York vaguely have heard of out of their grandparents' memory of some, like, disheveled guy who would be walking around. I don't know. Like, yeah.
And that's such an important, like, this idea that great men are great because they're fundamentally great, as opposed to this actual understanding that historical men who, whether they did something or they didn't fully do something, have been documented in this sort of contextualization of greatness. They had the privilege of engaging in that because there were very often women around them who were taking all of the responsibilities of the drudgeries of life off of their shoulders. Oh, yeah. And so, like you mentioned, Einstein's first wife, who was a brilliant physicist in her own right, but then she was like, it was domestic servitude after that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
She couldn't keep going. She had to just like do women's work.
Yeah. And he split up with her in, like, he like, I know this isn't the point, but like, when he broke up with her, he was a real dick about it as well.
Really? Ooh, what happened?
He left her for his own cousin. And and when he did so, he basically like forced her into having a nervous breakdown. But at one point, so before they were married, she got pregnant, and he made her give up the kid for adoption because of, you know, it was 1902 or whatever, and that's not, you know, you can't have a kid out of wedlock. But then after they did get married, he wrote her a letter. He didn't even say it to her face, and it said things in it like, I don't want you in my business. I don't want you in my office. You can't expect any affection from me. You can't, like, it was literally all of this stuff. He was a real dick to her.
He's just like mean.
Yeah, he was mean.
And yet she continued to raise his, because they did have children together.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Ugh. And so often, I mean, you think about like the era of this quote unquote lone genius, and it's like, okay, probably rich parents, the ability, like social lubricant to get into the right schools, to get, you know, to have an audience with the right people, subservient, or even if not subservient, you know, because sometimes maybe not subservient, but just like heavy gender rolled wives who supported them in their work and who basically took care of all. Like, I would be so fucking successful if I had a house husband or a housewife.
It's
you know what I mean?
About Sigmund Freud, that even that Sigmund Freud is one of the few people where people have actually pointed this out, that his wife Martha, people are like she was the original I don't know how she does it woman, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, the answer was tons of cocaine, but
oh yeah, the Freuds, of course.
But yeah, I think she's like the only one. Freud is like the only one where people will actually say like, yeah, he was able to do so much because of his wife. But I mean, Karl Marx. I wrote about Karl Marx. His wife Jenny. I mean, God, she deserves her own book. She put up with so much, and she didn't have to. She had some really good marriage prospects before Karl came along. But yeah, I remember, I think I wrote in the introduction, like something about, you know, how many geniuses there were who ended up being forced up a chimney in Victorian London. And, you know, we never got to hear from them because they never learned to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the sad part too. We talk about this like it's some sort of divine power, like people are just born to be great. And it's like, no, they had all the right circumstances. And a bunch of other people who, if they had had all those same circumstances, would have done brilliant things, never got the opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, just like, you're going to think I'm obsessed with Isaac Newton, but the man did so much. But he is like the absolute perfect example of that. Like, he grew up first of all being told he was like a god boy because he was born on Christmas Day. He was super rich growing up in like the English countryside as like lord of the manor. I mean, one of the reasons that, you know, we have a lot of his work at all is because he was rich enough to have somewhere to go when the plague hit London. So he, you know, didn't die of the plague. But even despite like being so rich that he, you know, could go stay at home for 2 years and work on gravity and optics because he didn't need to, you know, earn enough to feed himself or worry about being evicted or whatever. Even then, he still ends up, you know, spending 20 years trying to find the Philosopher's Stone and sticking a bunch of shit in his eyes for no good reason, and like threatening to burn down his mother's house because she got remarried. And like, he's still
Jesus.
Yeah, he was.
And then for whatever reason, I mean, we know the reasons, but like for these reasons, the downstream readers, like keep doing this weird backward justification where it's like, oh, the creativity of a genius. Like,
Exactly.
we must excuse such behavior, for it is madness
It's
that
just
helps
the
them.
price we pay for genius.
It's so stupid. Okay,
No.
so speaking of, I want some of these stories. You know, I want to know, what are some of these like super, not just dumbass things, but like kind of awful things that some of these people who we hold in such high regard have done? Like, what are some of the most surprising things you discovered when you were researching the book?
Some of the most surprising things. So, I mean, this isn't terrible. This is actually really good. But one of the most surprising things that I learned was actually about Marie Curie. So before I started, all I knew about Marie Curie was basically what everyone knows about Marie Curie, which is that she was a woman who discovered radioactivity. That's pretty much all I knew. But it turns out she was like this badass, like Polish independence fighter who like did a whole bunch of like really cool stuff her entire life. Like she risked being sent to Siberia by like the Russians for like teaching at an illegal university in Warsaw. So I really like, I'm so glad that I decided to like look into her, because I wasn't sure if she would end up being like interesting enough to put in or anything. But once I read all of that, I was like, this is a cool a cool woman and should be there was the cat piano of Johann Ryle. So he's the guy who this is the guy who invented psychiatry. Without him, you know, we wouldn't have that as a medical field. Or, I mean, we probably would, but we wouldn't have got it when we did. And he had some really good ideas that no one else had come up with before that. Like, he was one of the first people to recommend like listening to calm music and like just enjoying yourself and having people take care of you if you're like depressed or whatever. But he also suggested things like the cat piano, which is it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a piano that's made of cats.
Oh, it's made of cats.
Live cats.
Oh no, see, that is not what I thought. It was a piano for a cat.
Oh, that would be so much cuter. No. This is a piano made of cats. And it was specifically a treatment for anxiety patients.
And this was an intervention? Wait, I'm so confused. How does this work?
So the idea is that if you're suffering from really bad anxiety, someone will come and I think the idea was like it would pull on their tails or something, and it would make them yowl. And the idea was like the noise would be so horrible that it would like jolt you out of your anxiety attack.
Oh my.
And like in his notes, he actually wrote like, I know it's not like a perfect solution.
No, he didn't.
But he said, I know it's not a perfect solution, but donkeys are too difficult to wrangle into a piano. So
what?
So, yeah, it's
oh, and how much? Okay, like this is a prime example of me. How much do you think? And of course, this is going to be a subjective answer. But how much do you think of like the dumb fuckery that you covered in the book is, well, they did the best they could with what they knew at the time versus, come on, anybody, even in that era, in the context, like that was just a weird abuse of power or like a creepy kind of dark scratch or itch that they were trying to scratch. Like, did you find a balance between those things?
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely people in there where it's like, come on. I mean, I would even argue that Marie Curie falls into that category because, like, she and her husband were taking radioactive stuff and watching it burn their skin off in real time.
Right. So they're like, this is healthy.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know, I haven't discovered radioactivity. Maybe I'm not qualified to judge, but it feels like if something is burning your skin off, come on, guys, stop doing that. But I think, like, generally, most of them really were people who were just like, if not doing the best they could with what they had at the time, I think that sort of paints them as more serious than they were. I think a lot of them were like, let's just go hog wild. Let's see what happens.
Like, right, so it's like the Mythbusters of the time. Like, let's see how hard we can push this till it breaks.
Yeah, like Benjamin Franklin made a bunch of breakthroughs with electricity, but he did it because he was like, he wanted to like prank his friends. He didn't do it because he was like a serious electrical engineer who really wanted to like force through like technological breakthroughs. He pranked his friends. He used electricity for like party gags. And like Ernest Hemingway is in there for being just the absolute worst and most bumbling double agent ever. And God knows he wasn't doing that on purpose. Yeah, I think some of them for sure, they were taking the piss a bit. But I think generally a lot of them were just like, I wonder what happens if I press this button.
Anybody in there that you can think of where it was just like bizarre, where you're just like, what? Like you're still to this day, like, I don't understand why, but there it is.
Yeah. I think, to be honest, most of them, I mean, the kind of clear one, like if you haven't heard of Tycho Brahe, and sorry, any Danish people if I'm mispronouncing that, but you have a crazy language. If you haven't heard of Tycho Brahe, then you're going to read about Tycho Brahe and just be like, okay, this guy is made up, right? This never happened. He lived with a psychic dwarf and a drunk moose in a castle that he owned because he personally owned 1% of his country's wealth. He turned everyone who lived on the island that he bought into his own slaves. And
what? This is like a late night adult cartoon. Like, you know, like the I don't know, you're in the UK, so I'm thinking of like Adult Swim, which I don't think will translate to. Yeah, like
he ate so much gold that it may have contributed to his death because he was just so rich.
No.
Yeah.
But he knew you're not supposed to eat gold, right?
Well, he was like alive in the 1500s, so for him it was probably like, well, I'm rich, so I mean, I've run out of other things to do with gold. There was also Nikola Tesla, who has got quite a reputation these days. I think in the past like decade or so, a lot of people have sort of decided that he's this misunderstood hero that was like he was sort of hard done by Edison, and he was only in it for the scientific purity and everything. And it's like, some of that is true, but also like he spent the second half of his life just like running from hotel to hotel, never paying a bill, and designing weapons of like, not just weapons of mass destruction, but like literally like death beams that could end all life on Earth.
Why?
Like, I see, this is the thing. I don't know. There's an interview with him where someone asks, like, why did you invent this death ray? And he gets really upset, and he's like, it's not a death ray because based on how light waves work, a death ray wouldn't actually do anything. Like, you'd feel it in New York and nowhere else. What I've designed is a death beam. Okay, so please get it right. I'm not one of these like death ray idiots. Like, I don't know why he spent his time doing this, but he died a Bond villain for sure.
I cannot help but like this just reinforces in my mind why Elon Musk named his company Tesla. I just like, he was probably like, that guy, man, that's someone to aspire to be.
Well, Tesla also fell in love with a pigeon, and I mean romantic love.
No, please tell me what evidence we have to support this. I don't believe this.
We have evidence of him himself saying, I loved that bird as a man loves a woman, and she loved me. Which, once you've heard as a quote, is something that will never leave your mind.
Right, because I could imagine somebody saying, I love that bird. I mean, it's a bit weird with the bird, but maybe, whatever. I'm not one to judge. I would maybe say that about my dog. I love my dog as a woman would love her child.
Yeah. Even that is like, fairly normal.
Right.
Would you say you love your dog as a woman loves a man?
No, I would not.
No.
No, I would not. That's problematic at best. Wow.
Yeah. Some people in history have been weird, and I feel like I don't understand why we don't know more about why and how.
Yeah, honestly, so many of these stories that you tell, they're not well known.
No.
It's interesting because there are some of these, like, did you know that? And it's like, oh, yeah, it's kind of weird. Like, I did kind of already know that that Newton, like, stuck weird shit in his eye, like, to see what would happen. Not really in his eyeball, right? But, like, behind it.
Yeah.
Like, that I think I kind of knew because I'd seen some of the weird diagrams that he drew.
Yeah, he was big into, like, recording it.
Right. So it's like, oh, well, it's documented pretty well. But a lot of these things, I had no idea Tesla loved a pigeon.
Yeah, I think, again, this goes back to, like, all of the sort of advantages that, like you say, like, white men have had throughout history. I think like you say, we take the weird, and instead of thinking of, like, okay, he was a weird guy who also had some really good ideas, we sort of spin it as like he was a genius, so we don't really need to concentrate on the fact that he might have fancied a pigeon.
Right. Not only do we minimize it, we sometimes even like celebrate it. It's like he was a genius and this must have been part of his genius.
Yeah.
What?
You can tell he was a genius. Like, you can tell Mozart was a genius because he made so many poop jokes. It's like, dude, he doesn't like poop jokes.
Oh, Jesus. This must have been so fun to write.
Yeah, it was.
How long did it take from the time you first heard the first story and said, I'm going to start to like put this all together and do the research? Was it a long project?
So it was a long project, but not entirely because it should have been. I kind of had a baby halfway through, and that took like maybe a year out of the process.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Writing only and researching and stuff only. What would I say? Maybe like 9 months to a year.
That's actually not bad.
Well, I'm kind of lucky because I have like 0 circadian rhythm.
Okay, I was like, what are you about to say? I could hear the hesitation in your voice. You're like, well.
No, after I finished, I was like visiting my friend, actually the same friend who convinced me to do maths all those years ago. And she was there with her boyfriend. And her boyfriend was like, making nice, pleasant conversation. He was like, so how did you do it? Did you like set out a set number of hours per day to write, 1 chapter every week or whatever? And my friend just turned to him and goes like, no, if I know Katie, she would go 2 weeks without touching it and then have 3 days where she didn't sleep and wrote like 20,000 words. And I was like, how dare you know me so well? So
does it influence your interest in continuing? Do you think that this is going to be what you do? You're going to be the mathematician who writes science history?
I would so love that. I would love that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I know it's weird, like coming from someone who did like basically direct their life towards mathematics. Like I have like, a PhD in maths, which basically means I've like completed it. But if you had asked me like, what do you want to be when you grow up? When I was like 5, hands down, I would have said a writer. So I realized like a few months ago, like I'm basically living the dream that my like 5-year-old me had. So I'm
I
like,
love
incredibly
that.
lucky.
That's amazing. We're sort of running low on time. I always ask the same 2 questions at the end of my interviews. I'm going to be really interested in what your answers would be, because sometimes in the show, we talk about the very things that, I can kind of assume my guests are going to answer, but we definitely did not, or maybe we did, I don't know, during this interview. But before we get to that, is there anything that we didn't discuss? Is there anything that you wanted to make sure that we, like stories or like weird discoveries that you wanted to make sure the listeners heard before we move forward?
No, I was very,
No question mark. No.
I was very like happy to let you just like direct the conversation. I didn't really know what was gonna happen, so yeah,
easy. It's the best. Perfect. All right. Well, then let's just like dive right into this closer. So I would love to know from you, when you think about the future in whatever context feels relevant to you right now. It can be personal, it can be professional, it can be local or regional or global or cosmic. The first thing I want to know is, what is the thing that's keeping you up the most at night, the thing you're most concerned about, maybe even bordering on pessimism or cynicism? And then on the flip side, so we end on a more positive note, where are you finding your optimism these days? What are you looking forward to?
Okay. Yeah. So there is, I think, a lot at the moment to be kept up at night by. And like, yeah, I mean, a big one is, all the normal stuff, like the creeping threat of fascism and the, attack on women's rights and trans rights and everything like that. Like, I mean, we recently in the UK, as you may have heard, some guy got a new hat, and there was
Took me a second.
there was like anti-monarchy protests that like people got arrested for and stuff. Like, we're slowly losing rights that like we have had for hundreds of years, and there is a big part of me that is just like, I don't know how to sort of what's the word? I've forgotten the word. Like, feel right about having my daughter grow up in this world sometimes. Yeah. Not like I'm going to kill her, but like I need the world to change.
Right. No, yeah, I think we got that.
just to clarify there. And when I'm not thinking about that, so I do have some some things that are a bit weird. I had a therapist once who told me that like I find my life too comfortable, so my brain just makes up a bunch of shit to worry about, even though I shouldn't. So I am the kind of person who will lie awake at 2 a.m. wondering like what happens if the magnetic poles shift? Will we all die? And like, what if a gigantic asteroid is currently on its way and no one's noticed? Oh my God. So that can be a bit distracting. But what I would say is the thing that I take like hope from or whatever, something that has pretty much stood me pretty well for a few years now, is just the knowledge that like there is virtually nothing that can happen to me or to anyone else that no one has ever dealt with before. Like, and especially like that no one has had worse than me before. Like, it might sound really stupid, but like, you know, at those 2-3 a.m. worries about all life on the planet being wiped out, you can even extend it to like, yeah, but there are like trillions of planets out there. Life will still be out there. It must be. So I guess it's real big picture stuff, but like, yeah, most of it is just nothing. There's nothing that can happen really that can't be fixed or hasn't been dealt with by someone else before. Like, you're not ever going to be the only one that this has ever happened to. Does that make sense?
I love that perspective. I think that that's probably, incredibly helpful during the really, really hard times when you're suffering and it's really difficult to see any meaning or any purpose or any good in a situation, is that, someone has been through this before and they did get through it on the other side.
Mm-hmm, yeah. I mean, the first time I ever had that sort of realization, I'm not saying I came up with it, but like other people have probably thought it before, but the first time it ever hit me, it was like probably like a decade ago, and it like Christchurch in New Zealand had just had a really, really, really bad earthquake. And everyone just kept saying, oh, it's the worst earthquake since like 1921. And like, I just found myself really sad until like at one point my brain just went, so they had it worse in 1921. And like the city still survived, people carried on, even though it sucked so much. So yeah, I think that's kind of that's like a philosophy I try to keep in mind at all times, is like, you're never going to be alone in time and space in the things that affect you.
I love that. Well, gosh, everybody, the book is Edison's Ghosts, The Untold Weirdness of History's Greatest Geniuses. Katie, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you. I had a really fun time.
Me too. And thank you to everyone listening. I'm really looking forward to the next time we all get together to talk nerdy.